everyone. What a wonderful crowd we've got here. Thank you all for coming out. My name is Matt LaFlamme, and I'm the National Deputy Field Director for the Kennedy for President campaign and the next President of the United States, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. I'd like to recognize our State Director here, Jared Voles, our State Coordinator, Laureen Dumichel, our Volunteer Coordinator, who's Will Smith, our Field Leader, Jason Harper. And we've got plenty of county leads who I'd also like to recognize who are here tonight. We have Andrew Vanderbo, who represents the capital area. In the Newego and the Muskegon County area, we've got Patrick Bradley. Lapeer County, and excuse me if I'm butchering your county names here, guys, I'm from Maine. Lapeer County, we got Sandra Schmid. In Kent County, we've got Laura Jacob. In Emmett County, we've got Nancy Sherman. In Wayne County, we've got Afton Colleton. In Oakland County, we've got Daryl Johnson. In Royal Oak City, we've got two captains, Kath Husler and Phil Leese. And I'd also like to recognize Lisa Rod and Nicole Abador for making the volunteer badges for tonight. Thank you, guys. And now, I'd like to introduce the Traverse County leader, Beth Roberts.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's community town hall meeting with meet and greet with presidential candidate, candidate Mr. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. It's great to see all of you here, and I love the enthusiasm. This is wonderful. As he said, my name is Beth Roberts, and I am the volunteer lead for Grand Traverse and the Illinois counties. Yay. I was raised in a small, very democratic family and have voted as such most of my life. As late, I, like many of you, I'm sure, have become increasingly disillusioned with the political system in our country, feeling disempowered as our tax dollars are wasted on foreign wars and furthering corporate interests, all the while not helping American families. That isn't enough. Mr. Kennedy first came to my attention during the height of the COVID crisis. His perspective was an informed, fact-filled, and welcomed one, and a beacon of light during murky times. When I heard the announcement that he was going to run for president, I was beyond thrilled. Each time I listen to him speak, I find just another reason why I'm positive he is the best and the only real choice for our country. Just a couple of these reasons, a couple of my reasons. Mr. Kennedy's long and impressive career as an environmental lawyer, working to ensure that we have clean water, air, and food for our families in the future. His refreshing and inspiring commitment to transparency in government and telling the American people the truth. That he has concrete plans for economic reform and to secure our borders. And last but not least, his sincere desire to unite this country and heal the divide. I'm sure you all feel even more inspired after listening to Mr. Kennedy speak in person today. Please remember, we're not in this to win a fight. We're working towards a common goal to bring a life-affirming, inclusive, and supportive new era to this country and all of its citizens. I am humbled and honored to introduce our next President of the United States. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Robert F. Kennedy Jr.
All of you for making your way out here today. I'm very, very happy to be in Traverse County, and I'm happy all of you came out. This is an amazing crowd. And by the way, afterwards we're going to do some Q&A. And then we're going to do a selfie line, so I'm going to take selfies with anybody who wants. It seems insurmountable because the crowd is big, but we have a system, and the other day we did in Charlotte, North Carolina, or South Carolina, we did 600 people in 24 minutes. But, so we can get people out, but everybody has to kind of cooperate and keep moving and have your cameras ready. I went the campaign 3 weeks ago, took me to San Francisco, and I spent the better part of a year in San Francisco in 2018. Can everybody hear me in the back? Yeah. Right. I spent the better part of the year in San Francisco in 2018. And because I was trying the Monsanto cases there, we tried 3 cases, one after the other, in front of 2 different judges. And so every day before court, I would go down to Union Square to go to the gym. And Union Square is, for San Francisco, it's like Fifth Avenue to New York. It's the big shopping center. People come from all over the world to visit it. All the American brands like Nordstrom's and Bloomingdale's and Macy's and Gap and Old Navy and Levi. And it has the big foreign brands like De La Valle and Prada and Gucci and Burberry and Ferragamo and every store that you can imagine. I went back 3 weeks ago, and all of those stores are closed, and it's just acre after acre of plywood. And it's extraordinary for me to see the destruction of a city that was my favorite city in this country, and arguably the most beautiful city in the country. And the reason all those stores are closed is because of the chaos in the streets from the homeless population. And so when I left San Francisco, I began doing a lot of research on the homeless to figure out why is it we have 525,000 homeless people in this country, but half the unsheltered homeless are in California, which only has 12% of the population. So why is that? My assumption was that homelessness was related to drug addiction, it was related to mental illness, to extreme poverty. I also kind of had this assumption that people who become homeless elsewhere, like in Detroit or New York, and they don't want to spend the winter on the grades, that it would make sense that they would go to San Francisco. San Francisco, everybody knows, has a very welcoming social service system. I had also heard that certain cities like Dallas and Austin, that the police, when they pick up homeless people, instead of bringing them to a jail, they put them on a Greyhound to San Francisco one-way ticket. And people in San Francisco used to say that a lot too. But I started researching it, and my son Connor introduced me to a researcher and writer called Matthew Desmond, who's written kind of a seminal books on homelessness, including a very important book called Evicted. And he actually worked with the University of San Francisco and went out and did questionnaires with all the homeless in San Francisco. And what he found was that the people who are homeless in San Francisco, almost all of them came from San Francisco. They weren't imports. They were people who had homes in San Francisco and then lost them. And that mental illness and drug addiction, extreme poverty have very little to do with homelessness. There's more poverty in Detroit. There's more drug addiction in Detroit. There's more drug addiction and poverty, much more in West Virginia. And yet they don't have the homelessness problems like in San Francisco. And what Desmond says is that 100% of the problem of homeless, virtually 100%, is the price of the housing. And California has the highest priced housing in the country. The average cost of a house in LA is $800,000, which means in order to own a house, you have to make $250,000 a year. And so what Desmond says, this epidemic of homelessness that they have in San Francisco is about to roll across the country like a tsunami, because the cost of housing is rising so dramatically. And this state used to have one point when it was at the apex of, you know, the automobile industry and everything, had the highest ratio of single-family homes to residents of any state in our country. And it's important to have home ownership, because if you, as opposed to renting, if you own a home, you care about the community, you care about your police, you care about your hospitals, you care about your education system, you care about the appearance of your home, you care about your neighbors. And it gives you also it gives you an entree to the capitalist system, because if you own the home, you own equity, which means you can borrow money. So if you have an entrepreneurial impulse, you can go out and, you know, you can bet your home on it. You can buy something small like a sewing machine, or you can build a restaurant or retail outlet, and you have access to capital. And there was a period in American history that is called, economists called the Great Prosperity, that began immediately after World War II, when the American middle class became the greatest economic generator, the engine in the history of mankind. When I was a boy, our country owned half the wealth on earth, and it was because the middle class, and that great prosperity was kicked off by the GI Bill and a number of other pieces of legislation that made it so most Americans could get their own home. And that, you know, and it fortified our democracy, and it made us a very wealthy country. And now we're going in the opposite direction. So the average cost of a home in this country 2 years ago was $215,000, 2 years ago. The cost of a home today is over $400,000. And the interest rates have gone from 3 to 7%. So that home now costs 4 or 5 times what it did 2 years ago. I have 7 children. My eldest, who's 39, has a home. And he beat this tsunami. But the younger ones aren't even, none of them and none of their friends are thinking of buying a home. How do we get a home? How do I, you know, how am I going to afford a home? This generation, you know, we've broken the big problem. The promise of the American dream, the central promise, was that if you worked hard, if you played by the rules, you could finance a home, you could raise a family, you could have a summer job, a summer vacation, and you could put something aside for retirement. And on one job, on a single job. So there's nobody in my kids' generation that believes that that promise is good to them, that it's going to work out. They're worried about paying their student loans. And the chance of them getting in a home is just, you know, is very, very low. So why is this happening? Of course, inflation is affecting everything. And we know what the inflation comes from. It comes from spending $8 trillion that we didn't have on wars for the past 20 years. And now they're printing the money to pay for the wars, to pay $16 trillion for the lockdowns. And that money, they don't have the courage to come and ask us for it through taxes. So they do a stealth tax, which is called inflation. But homes are going up faster than inflation, much faster. But why is it? It's because 3 giant corporations, BlackRock, State Street, and Vanguard, have now, and one of their subsidiaries, Blackstone, which is co-owned by BlackRock and State Street, those 3 companies own 88% of the S&P 500. So they own the business of America. And they've now decided that they want to own the farmland and the residential housing, including the single-family homes. And they've already bought up approximately 5%. If we stay on this trajectory, within 6 years, they'll own 40 to 60%. And we're going to become a nation of renters. And it's driving the price of the rents up too. But you know, if you're a nation of renters, you go from being citizens to subjects. It is a colonial model, it's a feudal model like the one that we fought the revolution to get away from, where the oligarchy owns everything, and we are living by their courtesy on like serfs in our land, and so that these companies are now targeting that. Now I'm running against two presidents who both are running on the idea that they've brought great prosperity to this country. They've each served 4 years consecutively in office. And I spend a lot of time with regular Americans. And I did this, I've been doing that for the last 6 months. I've been running, but I've been doing it my whole career. This is what I'm representing right now. 1,000 families in Columbiana County, Ohio, who in East Palestine and other areas whose lives were upended by the Norfolk Southern spill I represented. Until recently, 10,000 families in Tennessee who were poisoned by zinc from a lead smelter. I represent another 10,000 on the Ohio, West Virginia, along the Ohio River, who were poisoned by PFOAs from the DuPont plant. And I spend a lot of time sitting at kitchen tables with people and talking to them about their lives. And if you tell them, most Americans today, that they are in the midst of a great prosperity, they think they're being gaslighted. Because nobody feels like that. People feel that the system is disintegrating. And they feel like their lives that they're disintegrating, not just economically, but mental health and physical health, and in all these communities are being torn apart in all these different ways, and that a lot of them are living paycheck to paycheck at the edge of desperation. The average income in America today is $5,000 less than the cost of basic human needs of food, transportation, and housing. That means if you get the bare minimum of food, transportation, and housing, the average American is $5,000 in debt at the end of the year. And what are they doing? How are they handling that $5,000 deficit? Well, they're putting it on their credit cards. 3 weeks ago, we passed an extraordinary milestone, which was $1 trillion in personal credit card debt in this country. By far the highest it's ever been. In the last 3 years, it's gone up $330 billion. And they're paying 22% interest on that debt. Oh, if the mafia did that, it would be called loan sharking and they'd go to prison. And if Visa, MasterCard, Wells Fargo, Citibank, Chase, Morgan, if they do that, it's just business as usual. And who do you think owns all of those businesses? Every one of them. BlackRock, State Street, and Vanguard. So they're strip mining the wealth from the American public. During the pandemic, we shut down 3.3 million businesses without due process, without just compensation. They were just told to close down. But the business that wasn't was Amazon. So we all got a 3-year lesson. We created the pandemic shifted $4 trillion in wealth from the American middle class to this new generation of billionaires. This new oligarchy we created in 500 days. During the lockdowns, we created a billionaire a day, 500 new billionaires. And Amazon was probably, one of the greatest beneficiaries of it. And Amazon, ironically, was, I did a book, not the Fauci book, but another one with Joe Mercola, on criticizing the lockdowns, and Amazon censored that book. Amazon was censoring critics of a government policy that from which it was profiting by billions. We all got a lesson on how to learn how to use Amazon. I didn't know how to use Amazon prior to the pandemic. And you know, it's magical. You find a picture of something you like and you hit a button and it's in your driveway the next day. So, but there's a cost to that, and the cost is the local retailer. 41% of black-owned businesses will never reopen. Some of those had 3 generations of equity in them. And the local retailers who paid taxes in this community are gone. Oh, these are the guys. This is, you know, the guy who hired your kid during summer vacation. This is the guy who had a plaque on his wall from the local Boy Scout troop thanking him for supporting them. It's the guy who paid for your kids' Little League uniforms and their hockey jerseys. And they're gone now. So, but at least Amazon's paying local taxes, right? Right, no, it isn't. But at least they're paying federal taxes. No. How much did they pay last year? Zero. So they're doing it right in front of us. They're just strip mining the wealth and the equity from the American middle class, which is the foundation of our democracy. Thomas Jefferson said, American democracy is rooted in tens of thousands of freeholds owned by individual Americans and families, each with a stake in our system, each with a stake in our economic system, and each with a stake in our democracy. If you get an aristocratic system with these huge stratifications of wealth above and widespread poverty below, then, you know, democracy is simply unsustainable. And most Americans today are making choices that they shouldn't have. 57% of Americans cannot put their hand on $1,000 if they have an emergency. If you are in that category and the engine light comes on in your car, it's the apocalypse, because you can see your life circling the drain. You can see that you're not going to be able to, you know you're not going to be able to pay that mechanic, and you're going to lose your car, and you're not going to be able to get to work, and you're going to lose your home. And that's what happened to all those people on the street in San Francisco. A lot of them, when you hit the street, within 3 days, you start to experience mental illness. So yeah, a lot of them went crazy. And a lot of them are drug addicts now. But they were just people like you and me who had a little string of bad luck, and then the engine light went on in their car, or two flat tires at the same time. And that's, you know, their lives began to unravel. And, you know, people that I sit at kitchen tables with are making choices. I talk all the time to elderly or their children who are cutting up pills to make the prescriptions, you know, last the end of the week so that they can pay for food. People paying for choosing between home heating, oil, food, gasoline, and food. I have a kid who I talked to the other day, who said every Tuesday he makes a decision whether he's going to have a meal that day or whether he's going to buy gas for his car. So I talked to a young couple who were sitting in a apartment that they could no longer, rental apartments they could no longer afford, with a baby crying, their new baby crying in their lap, and having to decide, arguing with each other about whether the baby was $50 sick or $100 sick or $500 sick before they bring them to a hospital. So, you know, people are making desperate decisions right now that they should never have to make in this country. And I saw President Biden when he went to Hawaii recently, and he had come back from Vietnam, and it was on 9/11, and he gave a speech about 9/11, and he said something during that speech that I was rather startled by, as he said that the reason that they bombed that Osama bin Laden bombed the World Trade Center is because he hated us. They hated us for our freedoms. So this is something that, was a trope that President Bush used at that time. It was ridiculed by Democrats. And I went on Neil Cavuto the next day, and I said, that's not true. That's propaganda. It's just not true. We know, Osama bin Laden was really clear about why he bombed the World Trade Center. He bombed it because we put 2 military bases right next to Mecca in the United States before that. Because the United States had supported him in his war against the Russians in Afghanistan. Oh, and that he respected the United States, and that it wasn't until we put those bases next to Mecca, which is, which is offensive to Muslim people. So that's their holy land. So why would the president lie to us about that? Why would he try to say something that simply wasn't true? And I went to Poland. It made me think of this trip I made to Poland in 1964 with my dad. And I grew up at a time when, as I said, we owned half the wealth. We were the biggest exporter in the world. Everybody wanted our stuff. When I traveled with my parents abroad when I was a kid, strangers would come up to me and offer to buy my blue jeans. They wanted American transistor radios. They wanted RCA Victrolas more than anything. Everybody wanted an American car. Wherever you were in the world, our cars were the gold standard automobiles in the world. I went to Poland, as I said, in 1964 with my mother and father, a year after my uncle was killed, with my mom and dad, 3 of the older siblings. And before we went, my mother took us shopping in Washington to buy gifts for children in an orphanage in Warsaw. We were very excited about it. We brought them clothes, American toys. But when we got there, the communist government didn't want us there. My father had been invited by a Democratic activist, and they blacked out any news of our presence in Poland because they didn't want the Polish people to know we were there. And when we took these gifts to give to the little children in the orphanage, the government had come in and removed all the children. And 2 days later, we went to Krakow to visit the cardinal, who was a living saint in the Cathedral of the Black Madonna. And he had resisted communism and the communists. He had been jailed, he had been tortured, he had endured this suffering with such extraordinary dignity and piety, and he had inspired this huge religious resurgence in the Catholic faith in Poland. So, and everybody knew that as soon as he died, he was going to be beatified by the Catholic Church. So for us little Catholic kids, to be able to meet somebody who was a living saint was the biggest thrill of our lives. When we went up the stairs, we passed through Krakow Square, which was empty, one of the biggest squares in Europe. It looked like a mile long. And we spent about 3.5 hours in the cathedral, and meeting the cardinal at the end. And when we came out, there were 1 million people waiting for us. And word had spread by word of mouth that we were there. The entire city of Krakow had emptied out and come to see us. And the embassy automobile, which we were driving in, was trapped in this sea of people and couldn't move for hours. My father hauled us up through the window onto the roof of the car. Then he gave a speech to this crowd. Then they began singing Sto lat to us, which means, may you live forever. And then they started singing another song that was described to me at that time as the Polish national anthem, but it was a song that was illegal. It was an anti-communist song. It was a criminal act to sing it. And they just sang it again and again and again and again for hours. And I was a little 11-year-old kid standing on top of this car signing autographs for the first time in my life and watching people with tears flowing down their faces and just trying to get close and to touch, some member of my family. And those are the same crowds I saw on that same trip in Germany, in France, in Italy, Greece, and England. They didn't hate us for our freedoms. They loved us for our freedoms. They looked to us for our leadership, for our moral authority. And one of the reasons that they were so passionate about us is because my uncle, because he had made a decision, a strategic decision at the beginning of his administration to project economic power abroad, but not military power. In every place that he could, to project economic power. His best friend asked him, "What do you want as the epitaph on your gravestone?" And my uncle told him, "He kept the peace." He said, "The primary job of a president of the United States is to keep the country out of war."
Say hi to Sherry.
He said he didn't want African children and Latin American children and Asian children, when they thought of the United States of America, to think of a man with a gun and a uniform. He wanted them to think of a Peace Corps volunteer. He wanted them to think of the Kennedy Milk Program, which gave nutrition to malnourished kids all over the world. He wanted them to think of the Alliance for Progress, of USAIDs, were the programs that he had launched to put America on the side of the poor, to end run the oligarchs, to end run the military dictatorships, go directly to the poor and try to grow middle classes in countries all over, because that was the foundation stone of democracy. And 3 days before he took office, I was at his inauguration. I was at the Democratic Convention in 1960. But 3 days before his inauguration, on my birthday, January 17th, 1961, President Eisenhower gave his farewell speech, which today we have to look back and say it was the most important speech in American history, because he warned us against the emergence of a military-industrial complex. From America, which was supposed to be the world's exemplary democracy, the city on the hill, the lamp to all the nations. It would transform us from a democracy into an imperial nation abroad, an imperium, and a national security state, a garrison state, a surveillance state at home. And my uncle, 4 months after he came into office, encountered that full force of that, during the Bay of Pigs invasion, when the CIA lied to him and the Joint Chiefs lied to him. And he took the blame when those men were dying on the beach. He took public blame for the Bay of Pigs, but he said privately to his aides, "I want to take the CIA and shatter it into 1,000 pieces." He fired Alan Dulles, and he fired Charles Cabell, and he fired Richard Bissell, the 3 top guys at the CIA. And then he refused to go to war. He refused to send any combat troop abroad during his administration. They were desperate that he send them to Laos. They consider him a traitor when he settled that war with the Russians without firing a shot. They tried to get him into Cuba in 61, Cuba again during the missile crisis in 62, Berlin in 62 with the Checkpoint Charlie crisis. And then, of course, Vietnam, his closest aides, the people he trusted and loved, General Max Taylor, Averell Harriman, Bob McNamara, and others said to him, "You've got to send 250,000 troops to Vietnam or the government's going to collapse." And he said, it's their government and it's got to be their fight. We can help them. We can't fight it for them. It's not our war. And he did end up sending 16,000 advisors, mainly Green Berets, who weren't supposed to be participating in combat. Many of them did. And in October 22nd, 1963, he heard a Green Beret had died, and he asked Walt Rostow for a full casualty list. And when Rostow gave it to him, there were 75 Americans who had died already in Vietnam. And he said, "That's too many, we're bringing him home." And that afternoon, he signed National Security Order 263, ordering all troops home from Vietnam, all military personnel, by 1965, with the first 1,000 coming home in December 1963, so a month and a half later. 30 days after he signed that, he was murdered. And a week later, President Johnson remanded the order and sent 250,000 troops over. And, you know, my dad my dad ran against Johnson, was murdered himself on a peace platform. Martin Luther King, who by then had become a peace activist, was murdered 2 months earlier. And Nixon became president, sent 560,000 Americans over there. 56,000 never came home, including my cousin, George Skakel, who died in the Tet Offensive. And, you know, that trauma, those series of traumas, the death of my dad, my uncle, and my father, Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, who was also a peace activist at that time, the Vietnam War, 9/11, and then the COVID crisis, this parade of traumas pushed our nation further and further down that path to becoming the, you know, what Eisenhower warned us against, a surveillance state at home and a military state abroad. And, you know, we're seeing that today, and we're all beginning to understand that the function of the intelligence agencies is simply to provide us with a constant pipeline of new wars that feed the military-industrial complex. So we spent $8 trillion on wars since 2001. Here's what we got for the Iraq War, which is half of that cost. Iraq is worse off than we found it. We killed more Iraqis than Saddam Hussein. We killed between 650,000 and 1 million. Today, Iraq is in an incoherent battle between Shia and Sunni death squads. We pushed Iraq into a proxy posture with Iran, which is exactly the foreign policy outcome we've been trying to avoid. We created ISIS. We drove 2 million refugees up into Europe. And that ended up with Brexit. And the riots that are happening right now in France are a direct result of, you know, ultimately of our blowback from the Iraq War and the Syrian War. So, but we spent $8 trillion on it. And now we're putting another $113 billion in March to Ukraine, a war that could have easily been settled. The Russians tried twice to settle it on terms that were very, very beneficial to us. In both cases, we forced Zelensky to sabotage those agreements. It's a war that shouldn't have happened, that could have been solved with diplomacy. We committed $113 billion. And and now both both Republican Democratic Party leadership with the White House has approved another $24 billion. And this is endless. This will go on for decades. So, when we committed this money, the first $113 billion tranche, in March, that same month, we cut Medicare to 15 million Americans. We took away their health care. And we took away food stamps. We cut food stamps to 30 million Americans from $283 a month to $23 a month. I was in a food kitchen yesterday in Flint, and you know, people are starving in this country. And so but that same month also, the Fed printed $300 billion unanticipated dollars to bail out the Silicon Valley Bank. So when the bankers need it, and when the military-industrial complex needs it, we got plenty. We got all they need. Just incidentally, the entire budget for EPA is $12 billion. That's all we got for the environment in this country. For our Purple Mountains Majesty, for our lakes, our rivers, streams, that's it. We're sending 12 times that to